Well, thank you all for joining us today for this segment in innovation with PWS. And we're thrilled today to have one of our board members joining us, Alex Nolte of NLS, which is Nolte, Lachenbach and Siegel. Alex has been in the sphere of IP governance and enforcement and guidance for, well, more years than I can count, I think. But certainly they've been representing internationally some of the massive players in that space, from NASA to all the way through to that of those that are well more known to you as well, such as your Googles and your Apples, and as well as oil and gas. So without further ado, Alex, would you also like to say anything moving forward in this space?
Thanks for having us on today. We're always glad to be a part of anything oil and gas. Oil and gas is a big part of our business. Another big part of our business is high tech. We do a lot of work in Silicon Valley, and right now it seems that oil and gas and high tech have really met. And so there's a lot of interesting things going on, a lot of new areas of the law with protection that are always a lot of fun to talk about. And we're happy to be here to do that with you.
Well, we really appreciate all the help you do for us, Alex. So so without further ado, there's a couple of key questions that I would like to cover with you today.
Sure.
I think are quite, they touch on a lot of points that are on a lot of people's minds at the moment across the industry spectrum, as you've quite rightly pointed out. And I guess one of the first ones I'll kick off with is with a lot of the trade shows now coming back into back online, people attending, presenting, sharing information. We've got ADIPEC just around the corner and coming up next month.
Mm-hmm.
And there's, with so many companies on display from America to Europe to Middle East and Asia, all to bringing their products to the show. What do you think when you're bringing new technologies like that to these sort of kind of trade shows? What kind of advice would you give companies in that space on how to ensure that they're able to show off as much, but also protecting a little bit of their secret squirrel juice?
Very, very common question. And there's two real issues I think that I see quite often. The first, and you'd be surprised, is that people show up at the show and haven't filed for a patent on their innovation yet. That's a disaster. You've got to do everything you possibly can to avoid that, even if it's putting together just kind of a quick and dirty filing before you get there. But if you show up at a trade show and you show your technology publicly and you haven't filed for a patent in some jurisdiction yet, generally speaking, you've forfeited your IP rights in probably 95% of the countries around the world. So number one is, before you go to the show, before you publicly disclose or offer for sale your invention, you've got to get a patent filing on the file somewhere. The second thing is, when you get to the show, a lot of our companies sometimes are pre-revenue or even early stage, and they're managing their IP budget carefully. And that is the smart thing to do, 100%. But you'll show up at an international show like what you guys are going to be at here next week, and there are people from 200 countries. There's no possible way you can protect your innovation in 200 countries. There's a lot of copycat nations out there that are known for doing that, that'll show up at a show, see a piece of equipment, you'll be at that show next year and they'll have it. And so you got to have that patent protection in place, but you can't protect it everywhere. So what do you do? And this is where you need to get a good IP counsel on your side and figure out where are those key jurisdictions you need to seek protection in. And you're going to look at where it can be made, where are you going to manufacture this thing, where it's going to be used. That's another jurisdiction. If it's region specific, if you're doing fracking, then there's certain regions where you're going to see more fracking than others. You want to get patent protection there, for example. Where your competitors are. Where your competitors are going to manufacture and sell and use the equipment. Those are the types of considerations you want to look at. And you can usually do that and narrow it down to 3 or 4 or 5 jurisdictions where you can get patent protection. And that'll protect you across, say, 90% of your business risk. You can never get 100% if you're managing your budget properly. But if you can protect 90%, that's good. The reason you select those jurisdictions is to enforce your patent. It's going to be where they make, use, sell, offer for sale, import, or where the contracts flow through. And so if you've got those places covered with where they're doing it, where corporate headquarters are for your competitors, where they're going to make it, all those types of things, you got as many bites as the apple as you can get, and you're usually pretty well protected.
Yeah, no, that's and again, our model, but certainly that's certainly something that really resonates quite loudly, actually. Alex, I mean, it's certainly something that I'm sure that will identify a lot of key areas for a lot of people.
Right.
But again, on the same topic, actually, when we're talking about going through in that IP sphere, with the contraction in oil and gas, and with the consolidation actually within a lot of larger E&P companies within their R&D departments, and even in some of the bigger service companies contracting in the same space, there's been a high uptake of smaller entrepreneurs, smaller businesses bringing that innovation in that was generally done in-house before. And a lot of these companies are being absorbed into partnerships through some sort of kind of a risk-based investment strategies that's done by these larger players, which can often seem quite daunting to a lot of these individuals and small companies as they look upwards to see obviously the big bright lights of how far-reaching these companies are. And what's the best way for them, would you recommend, to start thinking about protecting their inventions, their ideas, and their innovation, or even collaborating in a space of where they can keep some control?
Yeah, that's a tough one, and you're right. There's a lot of activity there, especially with the small businesses, in the 2 to 50 employee range that are doing a real good job of innovating, and the big companies are then pulling them in now because it's great opportunity. But there is no one size fits all answer for that. It's very, very situational. And so you just kind of got to take a look at that. You'll see somebody always wants to grab the IP and take it. And probably the best advice I can give to these smaller companies is don't get blinded by the dollar signs up front and just give away your IP because somebody offered you a really good chunk of money. Take a look at that and make sure there's not a licensing strategy that you can employ to get the same thing. So you license it to a big company, you still get a good revenue stream, maybe an upfront payment, and then a royalty stream coming back as well that has some timeline on it. But also, if the technology, for example, doesn't end up commercializing, you can get your patent back and go at it again, with someone else, and you're not dead in the water. And so my advice on that would be just really step back, take a look, get some good counsel to take a look at all the options and the situations, and don't just give that stuff up, your IP up front, especially in an ownership scenario where you assign it over without looking at all the options. Because in my experience, probably 7 times out of 10, transferring full ownership is not in your best interest to do as the small guy in that equation.
Yeah, and the secret in that space would be for always double check the small print too, right? And
yeah, I don't deal with the commercial paper on those deals. I'm the IP guy. I'm kind of specialized in IP, but I see those agreements come across my desk all the time, and 200, 300, 400 pages is not uncommon. And I read a lot of really boring stuff with patents and trademarks and things. It's the equivalent of Sominex sometimes, but those agreements I think maybe even better than what we can do is writing, technical jargon about software for 50 pages. So be careful with those agreements, and get good counsel, get somebody that you trust, get somebody that you have a relationship with. Don't just go with the big name, meet somebody, get to know that person. If your lawyer doesn't give you their cell phone number, don't hire them, is always the advice I say, because they're not going to help you. That's a real good barometer. And if they don't want to do that, then keep looking. There's lots of guys out there, lots of great firms, lots of good people. Just find the right one for you.
Yeah, no, and that's a really, really good point there, is the fact that just remember that, again, I suppose one of the key things would be just don't obviously get distracted by the initial dollar sign.
It's easy to get daunted when somebody throws several $1 million in front of you, but you have to have faith in your technology, have faith in what you've innovated, and you're worth every penny of it and more. Just keep telling yourself that I'm worth this and more, and get a voice of reason in there. Get some people that have gone down this road before. Lots of groups and things out there that'll say, great, you're going to be an instant millionaire, but let's make sure that you're doing the right thing for yourself now and tomorrow. So take a good look.
It's certainly something that we kind of reiterate ourselves at PWS, and we are in those kind of groups and meetings. and certainly
Right.
from the technology side of it, which I'm heavily vested in there, Alec, as you know,
Right.
is certainly across all spectrums from that we're involved in. Certainly, it's something that I think people really need to keep a close eye on.
Right.
But it's a great point that you raised towards the end there, was when you mentioned software, and that leads me to my next question, actually.
Okay.
And it's one of the big themes and across the industry, but not hubbed only in oil and gas. And I think this is where I think perhaps this the commingling, as you were saying before, where you're seeing these two industries really starting to come together, was in the space of big data, data management, and all this discussion around just now on what is truly AI. And from a patent perspective, how difficult is it when you start thinking about a horizontal learning platform on how you can actually patent that of effectively something that has no limits, and if it's changing how it's learning, then what are you actually patenting in that space? And that's certainly something that I find I would personally like to understand a little bit more about it as well.
Yeah, big data, IoT, AI, all these things are just on the cutting edge of patent law right now, and patent law is slow to move, quite frankly. Patent law is still trying to circle around software itself. It's just been within the last few years that I feel like the software patent laws and then the case law that supports it have finally come together where you can actually have a process for patenting software that works very, very, very well. Now, when you start talking about big data, AI, and IoT, you're out on the fringe now. You're on the cutting edge again. And so you're really pushing the limits of that. And so when, yes, all that stuff is patentable. No, it's not easy to do. You've got to get somebody to help you do that does it every day. People that work in high tech, work in software, work in those areas, because it is extremely difficult to navigate through the patent office using the existing legal structure that really just applies to software and make that work for you, for example, in big data. Because and AI is a whole nother area too. How are you patenting AI? Are you patenting what the end result is, or are you patenting how the software process itself learns? And then if it learns itself, that's another layer you got to try and get. And so this requires you to be very, very, very resourceful with all the tools in the toolbox to get that, because you can get it down on paper and get it in a patent application, but now you've got to go convince two patent examiners, because this is going to go through the regular examiner and the primary examiner. They're going to jump in and try and hold you up, and you've got to be able to get through that maze that is the patent office to get out on the other side. And it's doable. Just find the right folks to do it for you. Make sure when you're talking with attorneys and interviewing attorneys, find folks that when you say big data, they know what you're talking about. When you say AI, they know what you're talking about. Ask them how many cases they've written. Ask them what their strategy is. There's no one size fits all answer there, but they should be able to articulate, here's how we generally think through this process. And if they can do that, then they're probably going to do all right for you.
No, that's certainly fantastic advice there, Alex. I mean, it's certainly going to be one of the biggest challenges, I think, in our industry, moving forward, as we see more of the collaborative elements of it coming in as well, where it's a cross-company pollination within that big data as well. But and I certainly see that as being somewhere where it's going to take a lot of attention.
The patent office recognizes this too, and I'm talking about the U.S. patent office, but I really think it's the same across the world. Everybody's seeing this. But I was on a forum 2 days ago with some leadership at the patent office, and they made a comment. They knew we do a bunch of oil and gas work, and they also knew we do a bunch of high tech work. And they laughed. Their joke was the big dumb metal clients have now met the high tech clients, because oil and gas is always thought about it as big dumb metal that we use to get stuff out of the ground in its broadest sense. And then the high tech clients were just literally a whole nother wing of the patent office. It was in a different building, and they've finally come together. And it's really, really interesting, because neither had respect for the other for the longest time, but now all of a sudden they realize what they can do together. And it's amazing the things that are going to happen. I think the innovation we're seeing in oil and gas is in my experience, tenfold what it's been, in the last 10 years. I mean, this is the equivalent of, directional drilling, the difference that made in the industry, that type of thing. So it's going to be really amazing. everybody sees it all across the spectrum, from engineers all the way to the patent office. And I'm excited to see where it goes in the next 5 years. It's going to be really, really fun.
Yeah, and well, we're all looking forward to it, Alex. Well, I'm going to wrap up this section for just now. And Alex, thank you so much for taking the time today, for coming on and sharing your expert advice in this space of IP enforcement and governance. And it's just been fantastic having you on. I feel enriched.
Thanks for having me. I always enjoy chatting about this stuff. It's a fun topic. I enjoy it. It's going to be something that we're going to see in the news. For the last 5 or 6 years or so, you've been seeing software patents in the news, but you're going to start seeing these exact topics are going to be in the Wall Street Journal and Forbes, Business Insider. All those things are going to be talking about these exact topics. So you guys are right on point where you're going. I love what you guys are doing. Keep doing it.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. And obviously, it goes without saying, we highly recommend Nolte, Wachenbach and Siegel.
Thank you.
They're a force to be reckoned with 40 amazing people over there, 40 lawyers, and all the support staff are just absolutely brilliant. And really appreciate that, Alex, and the whole
Very
team.
kind of you to say, sir. I appreciate that.
Okay, thanks again. And for all of you joining in, thanks for joining us, and have a wonderful Arapec, and we look forward to hearing from you soon.